we start, as this is the final session of the conference, I wanted to just say a few words of thanks on my own behalf and on your behalf, because I think this really has been an amazing eLearning Africa, and it's taken place, as we're all aware, in very difficult circumstances as we emerge from the pandemic. So the first thing I want to say is a big thank you to the government of Rwanda, because it's taken a big commitment to continue to back the conference and to let us all come to Rwanda and to help this to take place. So on behalf of everyone, a very, very many thanks to our Rwandan friends and to the government of Rwanda. And the second word of thanks I'd like to say is to the staff of this conference centre and of the hotel, the Radisson Hotel next door, because I think you'd all agree that we have been superbly looked after here. And this is the second time that eLearning Africa has been held in this spectacular conference centre, and the way in which we are treated, the way in which we are looked after gets better and better and better. And I honestly think it's a toss-up between this and the African Union, which is the better conference centre, but the design of this place and the facilities are absolutely world-class, and so it's been a major contribution to the success of this conference. And the third thing that I would like to say is a big word of thanks to the eLearning Africa team, who I'm sure you've all noticed how hard they've been working, the team who've come from outside Africa and the locally recruited team as well. They've been working 18-hour days, some of them extremely hard, to make sure that this has been a real success. And so thank you to all of them, and thank you to the founder of eLearning Africa, who's taken the risk of ensuring that this took place, to Rebecca, who's sitting down there. So. And as part of thanking the team, I want to thank the sponsors and the exhibitors, because they're all a big part of this, and we like to think of them as part of the team and part of the eLearning Africa family. And it is a family. I've been to every single one of these conferences since the very beginning. And so I've seen the family grow and seen this remarkable event that brings people together from all around the world, people who believe in Africa and believe that this is the African century, and who continue to wish Africa well and enjoy so much working with all of you to spread the benefit of technology-assisted education and training throughout the continent. So those are the words of thanks. I now welcome you to another edition of the eLearning Africa debate. We've had in the past, and I see lots of familiar faces who've been to all of these before, we've had some spectacular debates, which have been very lively, incredibly lively, some of them. I mean, things happening in these debates that you wouldn't possibly see happening in Europe or America, and people really getting involved, because this is a very interactive format. I have to say, this is not a traditional African format for discussion. It's a parliamentary format, and so it's the type of system of debate that you find in parliaments, the British Parliament, for instance, but also in a lot of parliaments in African countries which are part of the Commonwealth. But it's an adversarial system, so it puts two sets of speakers against each other, and that doesn't always lead to the best result, but what it does do is provide good entertainment. And so apart from anything else, I hope that that's perhaps what we're going to get something of today. This is a controversial motion, and I'm sure that it will stir up a lot of deeply held views on both sides. And we're very fortunate today to have two sets of speakers, two highly qualified sets of speakers. We've got 3 professors and 1 doctor. So they're extremely highly qualified, and they're going to debate the motion that this House believes Africa urgently needs an African education model. And I should just say, I'm not going to give you an introduction to this, because in a sense you are like the jury, and I'm a bit like the judge in that I've got to see fair play, so I don't want to prejudice you in any way. But I would just say to you, you'll have seen the motion there, and underneath it, you'll see a basic description. But I would just ignore that. Don't get too carried away with that. Stick to the words of the motion, because that's what you've got to base your decision on. And base your decision on the arguments you hear when you've heard from both sides. So I'm not going to say any more about the subject. I'll just tell you briefly what the rules are. Each of the speakers is going to speak for 10 minutes. So I'll ask in a moment the proposer of the motion to speak first, then I'll ask the opposer of the motion, and then I will ask the seconder for the proposition, and then the seconder of the opposition to speak. And then I'm going to throw the debate open to the floor, to all of you, to give a short speech, because bear in mind that we have limited time, to ask questions or to make a contribution. And I hope that we'll have about half an hour for that. And then I'm going to ask each side, one speaker from each side, to sum up their arguments for 5 minutes each, and then we're going to have a vote by a show of hands. So, without further ado, I'm going to call our first speaker, who is Professor Zahir Hamid, and he is going to speak for the motion that this House believes Africa urgently needs an African education model.
Thank you, Harold. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I was wondering whether I would get a round of applause, but that puts a little bit more pressure on myself and my partner, right? It is indeed my pleasure to speak to you this afternoon, and certainly my pleasure to propose the motion for this afternoon, and certainly my pleasure to be part of this team that we have in front of us. The motion for this debate is: this House believes Africa urgently needs an African education model. And this motion, indeed, we believe, is in keeping with globalism. That Africa ought to develop an African model of education for the world, and in doing so advances the African brand of education for the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pretty sure that this is the motion that we would adopt. I mean, the very reason that we sit here this afternoon, and certainly the reason that we've attended this conference during this week, was really to imagine perhaps a revitalized African education landscape, which suggests that that may culminate in perhaps a revitalized and reimagined African education model. I take it that that's the reason that we're here, right? A little louder? Yes. Perhaps on a show of hands, and perhaps with the words "I" in a few minutes, and in particular for the rest of the team to be listening, we can get a sense of how you believe and what's your view on this topic. And as we've made the proposition of this motion, we believe that there certainly is space and opportunity for Africa to take its rightful place on the global educational arena. And certainly Africa has the necessary talent, people, and resources to develop an African education model that's compelling enough to be taken seriously at a global level. So can I ask you on a raise of hands at the least, or the words "I," we do get your view on that? Lovely. That certainly was audible, right? The presentation that I'll make, which would be within 10 minutes, is really in 3 parts. Firstly, I'll speak about the context that we find ourselves in. Secondly, what do we really know? And thirdly, what can we do towards this motion? We can perhaps look at what is not working in higher education in Africa and justify the need for a new education model. But my suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, that's not perhaps the best starting point. Perhaps we can get caught up into an academic debate of what an African education model is. And I'm suggestive that that equally is perhaps not a compelling reason for us to start at that point. We can perhaps talk about the various challenges that we face in higher education in Africa, perhaps the common ones of perhaps a curriculum that remains irrelevant, perhaps a financing model and access to funding that remains limited, perhaps the capacity, perhaps our own leadership. But there too, I believe that perhaps that's not the correct starting point. We equally can dwell on the past and consider how the historical colonial education continues to potentially impact the prevailing education that we find on our continent, and perhaps even in our institutions. But I would like to aver that that certainly is perhaps not the point to start equally. Perhaps our start has always been marred by the narrative of an African education agenda, which we have constantly juxtaposed with the generally acceptable and prevailing colonial Western education models that we find ourselves adopting and have adopted historically. And this certainly is a handicap that impedes our ability to break the shackles of at times a self-imposed ability to reimagine an education that is free and separate and privately owned by us. I would like to say that a new model of education built by Africa, for Africa and the world, that is the brand that I'm proposing, a brand of African education, is not a wholesale rejection of anything non-African, and I think that's important to recognize. But it is an effort to recognize that Africa has the necessary ability to imagine, dream, and chart its own way forward, its own agenda. And this is for the rightful advancement of the people of Africa, and certainly the advancement on the continent, of the continent on its whole. However, that responsibility does remain ours. The need for a reimagination of education in Africa is perhaps most needed in our lives and in this year far more than perhaps it ever mattered. Because the level of change, ladies and gentlemen, we have seen perhaps in the last 3 to 5 years is most unprecedented. I would think that the level of change we've seen in the last few years, perhaps in the last 5 years, exceeds what we may have seen in the last 50. Would that be reasonably acceptable? Surely the advances in technology, the impact of COVID on education, the declining funding for education, the greater expectation of the student, the growing need of the student has given us a reason for us to look at education differently. It has certainly created a spotlight on African education. And unfortunately, with just perhaps under 2,000 universities on the continent of Africa, we have the need to respond to a rapidly growing demand for education. And it is only the African child that perhaps will not be able to continue or even dream of accessing equitable and quality education if the status quo remains. Now, what do we know? Africa has the benefit of a burgeoning youth dividend. This can be translated to a great opportunity for the upskilling of the masses, hopefully for them to become economically active and responsible citizens. Alternatively, ladies and gentlemen, if we do not act and act decisively, perhaps we will be seen as culpable and responsible of not making a difference when the time mattered most. And perhaps we will be considered irresponsible towards the youth of the future of this continent and be seen as a failed leadership and perhaps a failing continent. That's certainly not something that we should have our hands participating in. The cost of and access to data and educational technology is dropping. We do know that. But further reduction is required. But that too remains in our hands. It remains in our hands of business, in the hands of political leaders, and in the hands of educational leaders. It's in our hands. The number of non-African institutions that have been entering the African education market and projecting a type of education is rapidly rising. There are actually more students from Africa studying in China than any other continent studying anywhere else in the world. Now that points to two things perhaps. One, a growing middle class that's emerging from the continent of Africa, perhaps. And secondly, declining European markets where you find international schools are gaining a better level of understanding and certainly a greater level of appetite to look at educational opportunity on this continent. However, Africa has pockets of African education excellence. We seldom speak about it. Africa has the benefit of diversity within itself. And I'd like to believe that that diversity is certainly required for the competitiveness that we can fall upon if we do look at benefiting from this diversity. Africa can contribute to a world of knowledge alternative to the prevailing education systems that we have on our continent. Certainly the education that we have, in particular, I would find projects a very individualized view of human existence. And we know that Africa in its spirit has a very communal perspective of human existence. Now, as I close my presentation, what can we do? Certainly political leaders, business leaders, and education leaders needs a unifying agenda for the continent, and that ownership of agenda is ours. The excuses, ladies and gentlemen, will remain ours too. The political will that is required is something that we must insist upon. African higher education regulation structures needs greater collaboration and alignment. In fact, it is appalling to imagine that students in Africa are not able to actually move between institutions. There are many students that say to me that they've commenced their studies and they battle to articulate to programs beyond their regional boundaries. International partnerships must be encouraged and economies of scale must be realized. The need to look at scalable and non-bricks and mortar educational solutions is something we must pursue. Student mobility and the student as a consumer in a hyper-competitive education market must be cherished. Higher education, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be reimagined on its own. We need to reimagine a model of education that includes foundation and school education, which means we need an integrated and comprehensive plan for education on the continent. Incentives in the promotion of the private higher education sector certainly needs greater level of romanticism, something that private higher education has not enjoyed in Africa. We should be thriving to promote the African brand of higher education, and this positioning requires meaningful investment from you and I and everybody else. Africa can own its educational agenda and work collaboratively in a globalized society. And we should be striving to promote this ideal. By Africa owning its educational agenda means that Africa becomes a global educational force. We should embrace globalism whilst owning and promoting the African brand of education. And embracing globalism does not mean that we are giving in to the other, and that's an important point. But it means we are realizing that Africa indeed has the ability to chart out its own competitive and globally relevant educational output. In March 2015, the first African Higher Education Summit was held in Senegal, Dakar. The summit identified the challenges and opportunities for African universities towards the realization of the African Union's Agenda to 2063, a blueprint and master plan for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse for the future. Now, as an example of what an African education model could look like and potentially be pursued, is that the organization that I come from, the Honoris United Universities, is actually Africa's first Pan-African platform for higher education institutions. And we are all married into a hope of potentially providing an example of how higher education institutions can be galvanized around the common good of advancing education. So Honoris comprises about 61,000 students on 70 campuses.
Would you mind drawing your remarks to a close now?
A minute, thank you. And the network is formed of 15 institutions. But perhaps you can check that out online. So I'll close with this. This is an example of us taking education forward in a very integrated and collaborative way, perhaps a model that should be pursued. The question of a proudly African education model is not a new question. It's certainly a question of how quickly can we adopt this agenda. Let us recognize our responsibility to the African child first, and then take ownership of that responsibility. Let us not abdicate that responsibility, for that responsibility remains both yours and mine. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hamid. I now call on Professor Sozinho Matsinhe to speak against the motion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have two questions because the motion is quite, the way the motion was presented there, you see, when you present a story in a very complicated and obscure manner, even microphones refuse to work. You see now, it is really a problem, a very serious one. Now, let me tell you something. All in this house, if you are a lady, all you need is what is a dress or a trouser that fits you, right? Is that true or not? No, this is a fact of life. You can't deny it. Yeah. Is it true or false? Thank you. Now, if you are a man, all you need is a comfortable shoes, nice trousers, and all that. The beauty of this room is because the different colors give us something which in the end is beautiful. Now, you come here, you say you want an education for Africa. Are you serious? No, there's something wrong here. Because you know what? Yesterday somebody said it was a math teacher. 4 plus 4 in Japan, in England, in Africa. So what are you going to teach to African child which is different from 4 plus 4 is 8? Now you tell me, we need to be serious here. You know what? If you don't know your past, your future will be confusing. You know that. So we've been looking for a color of African education of some kinds. Where is it? Now you agree with me that if you go to a shop, all you need is something that fits you and you'll be accepted in the world. We came to Kigali not to see the 1,000 hills. We know about them. But we came here to see what technology can offer us, right? Yes or no? Yeah, I mean, now you come here, you say, no, forget about technology because you want to have an education system of African, which color, which size? You know, let's be a little bit serious. We Africans, we can't go back where the others are going to the moon to look for water. Can we afford that? We can only be real Africans if we are part of what others are doing. I'm not surprised that, you know, most African countries got their independence in the 60s, right? And we have never had even a single bicycle we can sell to the world because we are busy looking for African things in isolation of what the world can give us. We can't. Now, Chair, I have got a problem here with the previous speaker. We need to be realistic. Africa is part of the global village. the content, perhaps, don't get me wrong, I'm worried because you'll get me wrong. I'm not saying that education for Africans is bad. No. What I'm saying is, we can't come here for a serious business, and then in the end we say all that. No. The type of education we need is to take us to the global, the train is moving. If you look at the technology exhibition outside, it shows you that technologically speaking, the train moves at a very started speed. So we as Africans, this is how we believe, and I think it's correct. We need to find a space in that train so that we make our meaningful contribution to the world. Now, if you go there, you say, now, we need an African education system. It's like joining an hunting expedition without a gun. You'll be the easy prey. So we need to join the world. Make sure that, yes, we're Africans. Nobody is saying we're not African. No. That is not what I'm saying. We need to be part of the global village. We need to make use of what is available in terms of technology. So I'm a little bit worried because I hope maybe they've gone home because we had ministers yesterday. So they will live here believing there's something called African education. That will be misleading. I still need to see the color, the size, and see how it will fit into the world. All we need is a universal curriculum which will allow us to fit in the global scheme of the things. We appreciate and make use of what is happening in the world. If we believe that while others are going somewhere and we have to go back to look for something African which we don't know how it will look like, then the 50 years of independence, the African, actually, by the way, Agenda 2063.
Can I interject?
Yes.
Will you take an interjection from
Can
Professor
you allow
Hamid?
me to finish? But you see now. Now you see. Now you see. How can we?
If you would allow, I'll be very quick.
No. Let me finish. Did we inject when we were speaking?
Academic dialogue is certainly one we encourage.
We listen to you. But anyway, okay, I give you the benefit of the doubt.
No, I understand that storytelling is certainly a methodology we use in Africa to promote ideas. But the story, ladies and gentlemen, that we're hearing is actually one that was responding to something that actually was not said. What was being promoted was an African education model for the world that emanates from Africa. And finally, there is no such thing as universal curriculum because curriculum reflects the region and the people and its history on its own right. And one cannot seek a universal curriculum to be responsive to every nation and every country. Thank you.
You see now. That's why I was refusing for him to interject. You see, he says things which I never said. I said to you, there's no storytelling here. Let's not fool ourselves. If you want to tell stories, we are going to make fire outside and we'll sit around the fire and tell stories. Here, we are dealing with serious matters. I'm very worried. Because I asked you 4 plus 4, how much it gives you? How much? No, if you say 10, you will fail. 4 plus 4, 8. You see now. Now, the technology outside, did you see any of it with African colors? No, there was technology which allows you to do things at your own pace, at the way you want them to be done. Now we come here, we say all that is hopeless, let's go and look for something African. Did I say the universal curriculum? Did you hear me saying that? No, I never said that. No. You are not listening. No, let's be a little bit serious. Let's be, no, did I say that? All I'm trying to say here, listen carefully. Listen carefully. Don't put things in my mouth which I never said. No. And don't be fooled or biased. What I'm saying is, if you go to a shop you are looking for a dress. You look for a dress that fits you, which will make you likable and respected in the world community of human beings. If I came here with a trouser with one leg short and another one, you would have asked, where does this one come from? This is all I'm saying. I'm not saying there's something called global curriculum. Did I say that? No way. All I said is, tell me how the African education system looks like. Does it give us a respected place in the global scheme of the things? When interjected, I want to tell you about Agenda 26.3. It says Africans have to be, listen carefully, I've got a copy there if you want it. Africans need to be part of the global community and respected as Africans. So I never said there's something, no. If you come with a curriculum because you want it to be universal, you say, no, there's no such a thing as a Rwanda, people won't believe you. But what I'm saying is, please, remember that we are part of a global village. And we want to be there in our rightful way and dignified manner. Now, if you say, I said we need a general curriculum, I don't know how you put it because I never said that. Maybe, you know, English is my fourth language. Probably didn't understand what I was saying. But I never said that. What did I say? I said Africans. Now, there's a chair there. I said Africans, don't be misled by anyone who says at this point in time there's something called African curriculum or African education. Have you ever heard of something called the British curriculum, Korean curriculum? Most of you here drive Hyundai, Benz, and all these things. You think they were produced by some, narrowed curriculum of some kind? No. You go out there, you be part of the global village, you make use of what is useful for you. This is all we are saying. And I'm so worried, I won't sleep tonight, because I see some of you believe there's such a thing called African education. It doesn't exist. If you go home, you say 4 + 4 is 10, you will fail. And you say that's African education. No, it will give you 8, This is the point I'm trying to make. So please listen to things carefully because it's easy to be misled. I'm not telling any story. I'm telling you something that you know. There's no such a thing like typical African education. I don't know how they put it, but I know there's no such a thing. Even you know it. Yeah, that's why when I said 4 + 4, it's what is 8. So please, we need as Africans an education which equips us with knowledge, which will allow us to actively contribute to the development of the world. This is the point which I believe, Mr. Chair, or even Prof there, the opponent cannot deny it. An education which will make us dignified citizen and respected across the globe. This is what Agenda 2063 of the African Union says, which was quoted here. I don't know which version was read, but the one I have, this is what it says. So ladies and gentlemen, let's wake up and see if we find a dignified place in the train which is going at a higher speed. Thank you for listening to me and for believing in what I'm telling you.
Thank you very much, Sozinho. I now call Professor Mogobe Ramose to speak in favor of the motion. You have 10 minutes.
Good evening to you all. I hope you will assist in my confusion. I was told that this will be a parliamentary style debate. Well, I've never been a member of parliament, of any parliament. So I don't know if it was well considered to ask me to pretend that I am a member of any parliament. So I have to guess. I'm making a lot of guesses. One of the guesses is that I suspect that there is some kind of singing in the synagogue. I think also that even in the mosque, there is some singing, and also in the church. So I wasn't too sure if all these churches do not know the word chorus. Is it part of the vocabulary of the liturgy when they sing to say we have a refrain or a chorus? Now, not knowing parliamentary rules, I was thinking I should avoid asking you to sing the refrain with me. And being in Africa, I would have preferred to invite into parliament some drums, so we have the drum beat as I speak. I don't know if parliament allows drums inside, because my talk is exactly about the drum beat. Mr. Speaker, I'm not too sure, but we had the drum beat last night, so I will also not worry about inviting the drum beat. I was very happy to hear the previous speaker immediately after me saying that, you know, if you do not know your past, your future will be confused.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
I know members of parliament like to
interject?
say others are lying, but do tell that I'm lying. Never, I give you
He
the
can
chance.
interject if he allows you to interject.
That's what I'm asking. I'm not
Yeah, I have allowed him with the preliminary remark that I know that members of parliament want to prove that others are lying. So carry on.
No. I don't want to prove anything here. All I'm going to say is that if you are going to use some of the things I say, don't put strange things in my mouth. This number one. Number two, you see, some of us don't go to church. We don't know what the mosque is, what the synagogue is. So if you want to talk about African curriculum, remove the church, because this has to do with believing.
I've already removed them by saying I'm not going to invite any chorus.
No.
Yeah,
Thank you. Don't invite any chorus. And if you are going to repeat what I said, make sure you repeat it exactly. Don't put things into my mouth.
I'm so happy you intervened, because, you know, you being the best linguist that I know, I want to tell...
No. You see, this has nothing to do with linguists. Do you know what is a linguist? No, you don't. They don't. So please, Mr. Speaker, don't allow people to confuse us here. We are talking about education, not linguistics.
Yes, education is also about language. How can you be educated without language? Really? There's no such thing as education without language. So I want to appeal to you as a linguist, someone with language knowledge. You see, when I went to the Africa Museum in Tervuren near Brussels, popularly it is known as the Museum of King Leopold. What struck me was that after paying, just at the entrance, you have 4 languages to your right. What interested me was that the first language is an African language. an African indigenous vernacular. I could guess what it means from knowing some of our languages, but it reads as follows. Those who know the languages better will get it. It said, yote yapita, isipokuwa yailo yopita. Now, for those who don't understand this language, it was written English, French, German, comme ça. But they say everything passes except the past. So I wasn't too sure if you could enlighten us on exactly which language. Because of the connection between Belgium and Congo, I suspected that maybe it is Congo, one of the Congolese languages. But never mind, I know that you're going to mislead me, so don't try to help.
Mr. Speaker, please allow me to say something.
Well, if he allows you, but what you have to be careful of is that the more you intervene on him, the more time he gets.
I know that. But also, we need to make sure that we hear something which has to do with the theme. I mean, now we say the language came from Congo, you're a linguist. Hey, please, we need to hear something to do with the motion.
I see.
Yeah, so please go, because we'll be confused. It's not us confusing you, it's us.
You see?
I'm very serious.
I get you, but I made a point already. Now, linguists are usually supported by philosophers. And so I just would like to say philosophically that the body is not sufficient as a mode of being in the world. You need language to complement the mode of your being in the world. So I don't go into details, but I hope I have assisted the linguist. Now I will come to my first point, which is this. Education in Africa today is a well-serviced transmission belt delivering suicidally intoxicating Western epistemology and standing in awe at the unfolding economic subordination by the dragon from the East. I'm happy you laugh. So, like you have clapped hands, my refrain, if the chair were to allow me, for each statement would have been, wow, education for liberation is an ethical imperative to this situation. So you would have had, Well, the second point, education in Africa today is like a rootless tree without anchor, a dangling participle without a main sentence. See, so exactly, that's again the refrain. Okay. The third point, because in Parliament we live in time. We don't live like, in Africa we live time. In Parliament it is like eLearning. Everything must be according to the command, quick, quick, quick. So, all right. So I get to my third point. Education in Africa today is like a desert without an oasis. Yet, it produces drafts, quenching the thirst of many into intoxication, and only a few into sobriety. How? Why should we, or are we not the, wow, the linguist is there, but I won't ask you, I remembered now. No, I have not asked you, say, why are you intervening? You see? You see Parliament, can you see how Parliament works? Pardon? Okay, you're welcome.
Look, go to the facts. You see, ladies and gentlemen, 50 years after Africa has been liberated, and you want to join and enjoy what the liberation brings us, somebody comes and say, you are not yet liberated. That's disturbing. Which liberation are we going to look for now?
You know, sometimes you have to check, especially linguists, but we don't have to elaborate. I'm sure you understand the word epistemology, so don't worry. If you don't understand it, we will refer you to the novel, which is quite famous these days, the palm wine is that drunkard or drinkard? You see the play of words there. All right, so we leave you there. We don't go very far. My last point, the fourth industrial revolution is education for the negation of the right to privacy. A compulsory striptease if one wants to acquire social benefits or to put human dignity on sale. Well, I know I have more minutes, but I would like it to sink. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, Mogobe. And our final speaker, who I now call, is Dr. Njeri Mwagiru, who is going to speak against the motion.
Wow. So, this House believes Africa urgently needs an African education model. Colleagues, friends, I am in opposition to this motion, and I will share my few comments later in response to what has been shared here and Prof received with some dismay, but I will share my few comments from a futurist perspective and share some of my rationale. First, let me perhaps qualify. I'm not in opposition entirely. I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of the points that were raised so eloquently by the previous debaters. Of course, I support the need for an inclusive system of education that acknowledges our African indigenous systems. And of course, I strongly believe we need a skills revolution on the continent that is context and relevant for the issues we faced here. Data and information must be contextualized. However, let me pick up on some of the points that were raised from the point of view of time, urgency, and agency. My humble opinion is now is not the time to isolate our thinking, our research and skills and capacity building from the global context. And the first speaker spoke so broadly, I would say even naively, mentioning dates as early as 2015, and I believe he mentioned that there are 2,000 universities on the continent, but the platform that he is himself championing only has 15 institutions on board. Colleagues, friends, how much time do we have? A question that has already been raised frequently today. No. If we're talking about the youth and our children and the potential that we have on this continent, the world needs Africa, and we are a significant and important part of the global family. On this, we agree. We don't agree on the solutions in terms of the education model. I will not repeat the youth demographic statistics that have already been shared, but at a time when very soon the world's workforce will be the majority from African youth populations, is this the time to isolate them from that opportunity on the basis of some, unfortunately, naive calling to a heritage that is isolated from a global family? No. I would also like to quote Agenda 2063 and perhaps highlight that In this vision of an Africa that we want, we don't draw separating lines between a continent that is steeped in heritage and a continent that is also globally integrated and a strong player on the world stage. It's a false separation. And when Prof was speaking about his universal curriculum, I believe he's talking about maths, science, technology. We can move it further. Music, dance. These are universal elements of knowledge that are shared across contexts, no matter where you come from, and that allow us to connect across diversities. I would also like to emphasize, especially, that the African education system has not been influenced by colonialism alone, and which is why I was so dismayed to hear one of our great profs here snoozing on the stage, already forgetting the heritage that we've built, a heritage that he is a part. These are great professors, part of our education model right now. Why would we discredit our gains? Why would we say that we have not already stepped into the global stage and now is our time to rightfully claim our place? Why shift the goalposts once again and take us out, isolate us, when all the world is beginning to face us and come into our region? We already have African education models in place. Let me mention some of the greats: Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, Cheikh Anta Diop, Achille Bembe, Amilcar Cabral, more recently, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Nawal El Saadawi, Sarah Longway, and so many more that have contributed to our education models, that have taken our education models already to international and global institutions and are representing us there at the same level with the quality that is globally recognized. Yes, of course, we need transformation. I thought it was extremely convenient that in offering solutions, the first speaker decided to ignore the problems we have with HEI, ignore the issues that we're facing currently, and instead pitch a glorious vision of how we're going to build a Pan-African, isolated education model. How are we going to do this? Perhaps we need a reality check. I would like to end with, the narrative of African exceptionalism should end. I actually believe it's dangerous because it is a narrative that can be used in so many ways to isolate us, not only in terms of education, but in terms of business opportunities, in terms of investment. Once we begin to take ourselves out of the pot, then what else will we begin to take ourselves out of, or will that be used as an excuse to exclude us? Why would we exclude ourselves? Yes, we must take African knowledge systems and education contributions to the world, but this cannot happen in isolation from our current starting point and with the urgency we face with our youth demographic. We need to ensure that those youth in China, UK, Switzerland, Romania, that they're well supported to represent Africa in those international contexts, as they are already doing. Finally, the issues we face are global. If we're looking for an African education model, surely we're speaking about truly an Ubuntu-based understanding. And Ubuntu doesn't isolate anyone. Ubuntu sees all of us together on the same platform, working together to solve shared problems. Climate change, poverty, human rights, debt, multiple development challenges, complex and interrelated. These problems reach from Europe to the Middle East, from China, India, Brazil, to America and Mexico. What can Africans also learn from elsewhere? Africa is not a panacea or a silver bullet. It would be naive, again, to think that we can resolve the world's issues all by ourselves. No, we need to enhance our approaches. How can we better bring our unique gifts to the world and take our position as a strong member of the human family? Let us push to build education models that are, no sir, that are locally applicable, but globally relevant. Let us not perpetuate these divides. Let us instead work together as a global family, leveraging on the strengths and comparative advantages that we each bring. And let us, each of us, take our place to pull our planet, not just the continent. We must pull the planet out of crisis. Thank you. If my speakers want to say anything, the floor is theirs.
Okay, thank you, Njeri, and thank you to all our four opening paper speakers. I'm now going to throw the discussion open to the floor, and I think we've got about 25 minutes. So I want to hear comments, contributions, questions, but please keep them brief so that other people get a chance as well. And if you could put your hand up and introduce yourself, and wait for the microphone. And if you think I can just about see right down to the back, so it should be clear. But who would like to go first? Yes, just here. Just wait for the mic. Oh, you've got the mic. There you go.
Thank you so much to the debaters. I'm Candy Muchungi, and I say hey to my fellow country person. But I have two questions for you. The first, if Africa has arrived, why are majority of our youth disenfranchised? There must be a new way of doing things for Africa. Second, African exceptionalism could and should create a new future that cannot be imagined by the existing colonized minds that exist now in Africa. You talk about all the greats, but they are just a drop in the ocean. Where are the rest of Africa? We're still falling behind. We're so few of us here. This is not representative of the African population, which is a fifth of the entire world. We need to do something different. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was two questions, so I'm going to allow both sides just to respond very quickly. Who wants to go first? Yeah, Njeri.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for that question. Africa has not arrived. You know what? The world has not arrived. We are actually in an era of crises, and yes, we need new ways. We all need new ways, and I suggest that the new ways are not isolation-based, but are integration-oriented. African exceptionalism also caused colonialism, and that exceptionalism continues from a negative perspective. The master's tools will not dismantle the master's house. And finally, yes, drops in the ocean, but we know that it is from these drops that the ocean comes together, so we must not discredit the drops.
Okay, so next, yes, here, on this side, second row, in the middle.
Thank you very much. I'm Joshua Valeta. I'm the Director of Open Distance and eLearning from Malawi. Mine is a comment. Listening to debaters from either side, I seem to deduce that actually both sides are in agreement. I think we are agreeing that Africa needs a model of education that works for Africa. Whether it is supposed to be an African model, whatever that means, again, semantics or philosophy a little bit, of course, wrapped around it. I'm not sure where to put the preposition or whatever preposition we should put. But I think I hear both sides suggesting that we need an education model that works for Africa. I'll pause there since we have limited time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Right at the back. That's it.
Yeah, my name is Michael, and I also have a comment. I've listened to the opposition, but I realize they seem to have not understood the motion. The idea of developing an African education model does not really mean isolation. The question here is, what can Africa offer to the globaler? I liked the opposition, the first speaker in the opposition. He gave us the testimony that for more than 50 years, we could not even just sell a mere bicycle. The issue is, we shouldn't remain at the receiving end. We need to critically think and see how we can contribute to the globaler. Thank you.
I'll let you react if the other side react as well, if you're happy to respond to that as well. Otherwise, we move on.
Thank
Okay.
you. I would like to respond. You will follow. Check real.
Don't disagree about who goes first. You go first.
Yeah. Well, I think we have heard a lot of what Africa ought and should do. And so that is not really an issue, because most of us know from so many declarations by African heads of state long before us, the Rome Declaration, this, and that. The critical question is to ask, why is it that this is not the case until now? Let me just give you one example. You know, in 1961, a well-placed gentleman by the name of Kennedy, when he took over as US president, in his inaugural speech, he declared in word and in writing that actually the world is in a position, now I'm using his words, to abolish all hunger. My friend, if that were true, that 60 years ago or 61 years ago, he said this 61 years ago, who does not know that Africa is hungry today? The bottom billion that we were talking about is really increasing in the meantime. One. Two, I told you about Belgium. Not so long ago, Belgium, which is the size of the Kruger National Park, territorially speaking. If you know the Kruger National Park in South Africa, territorially speaking, Belgium is that size. How does Belgium get it right to have its economy almost equal to that of the entire sub-Saharan Africa? Can you believe it? Of course, with the exclusion of South Africa. And this is not a rusted statistic. It means something is wrong, somebody is doing something. Now, I want to suggest one thing for reflection, which is this, that if we recall the assassination of Lumumba, we will go a long way in beginning to think about other issues that actually prevent Africa from going the way she wants to go. Just let us think of that, the assassination of Lumumba, and then we will go a long way. Thank you.
Okay, Sozinho, briefly.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. The Achimwene means brother, I'm talking to. We need to be clear here about the things we are saying, because if we give the impression that we both agree there's something, we won't get anywhere. So let's agree, first of all, you know, the basics of the things. But the danger of speaking is that you will be misquoted, you see? So if you want to be if you don't want to be misquoted, you keep quiet. But if you are speaking about facts, not inventing stories, philosophical or things which we don't understand quite well, you need to speak. And one of the problems with education in Africa is that we believe that what we have is fine, we don't need to speak. So if it's skewed somewhere, we just panel it, beat it, will go straight. That's not the point. We all agreed. I mean, you can't go and tell somebody that, oh, from today you are not a Mozambican, or you are not a Malawian, or you are not a German. People won't accept that. But they want to take that and make a contribution to what is happening in the world. Now, if we are prisoners of the past, we say what we have is beautiful, we don't need to change. That's not the point. The point is, please, let's make use of what scientific development allows us to have and use. Isolation causes a lot of trouble. So we need to be part of the global village in the right way. We make a contribution. But in order to make a contribution, you need to know what the others are doing. So be part of them, not against them. So it is the point which has to be clearly made. So please, I think the speaker here should have laid down some rules. If you want to speak, don't put things in other people's mouth. Listen carefully to what they are saying and contribute onto that. That's very important. Because in the end, we will have problems. We won't know which is which. And the fact of the matter, our life experience shows us that we as Africans, without negating our Africanness, if there's such a thing, let's be part of the global of something what is happening. I'm surprised that people can so easily change. Parliaments are complicated. Because the people I see here...
Sozinho, can I just say that if you want to listen to what people are saying, you have to give them a chance to speak.
Yes, so I'm ending.
We want to hear
I'm ending now, Speaker. I'm with you. I won't speak, so my appeal is that I'm not a linguist. Who told you? So, so please, I'm not going to speak anymore. But if you want to make a contribution, don't put words into our mouth. Speaker, that's the point.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yeah, the lady in the middle there.
Thank you very much for the very lively and informative debate. So I tend to agree with the side that has posited in favor of the motion, but I have a question that I think has not been adequately addressed, which was raised by Dr. Njeri. If we agree that we need an African method of education, an African system that shows, sort of highlights and showcases what we have to offer to the global community, my question is, obviously there have been roadblocks to date to that happening, and what makes you think that we're in a position to do better now to actually bring that forth? So how do you address the urgency question that was raised? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to allow very, very briefly both sides to respond to that question, and then after that I'd be grateful if we just had comments, because we're running out of time, and both sides can respond in their summing up. So if you both want to say something on that specific question, briefly.
Thank you, and I think that that's a fantastic question. Just for contextualization, on the advancing of an African education model allows us at the least to consider a new perspective in imagining a revitalized education prevailing or emanating from Africa for the world. So it's not necessarily projecting what Africa can and can't do. The whole idea here is how can we press reset and work towards a model that is far more collaborative, far more agile, that advances the interests of the African continent at a global scale. So it's about the perspective and lens we use rather than the presentation of actually what we can bring to the global stage. Njeri.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions and the comments, which are all well noted. I do think the issue of urgency and agency is very important. I'm a pragmatist, and we speak around our youth and wanting to be responsible for them and not culpable for causing any more challenges. This is not a new vision. The first speaker admitted it himself. We've been talking about this since 1963. And we've now projected the vision to 2063. So we need to realize that actually even here in this conference, how we are mobilizing is through partnerships, through mobilizing on our comparative advantages. And again, we must end the narrative on African exceptionalism. India also has challenges with poverty. China is also dealing with its identity on the global stage. Is there not something the global South, developing countries, a global family, can together come together in solidarity to develop? Are our education models not now better suited to looking at a global reality? That's contextually relevant, of course. That's how it will work. But again, not a system that embraces or promotes or advocates exceptionalism.
Thank you. Yeah, more contributions or, yes, right at the back again.
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel from Uganda. Africa is part of the global continent, and indeed, Africa is part of the moving train. But I think that our contribution to this moving train may be wanting. Reason because I think that probably we have concentrated so much on learning things that do not solve African problems. Maybe the reason for rethinking. My Ugandan colleagues will bear me witness. The government of Uganda in 2018-2019 did a curriculum review. But before then, the time I went to the secondary school in 2004, our curriculum of geography, which I vividly remember, was more focused on Canadian prairies and Tennessee Valley Authority. So at that time, I wondered, as somebody who had never even stepped outside my district, home district, how would a Canadian prairie or Tennessee Valley Authority help me solve a local problem within my environment or my local district? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I just see how many more we've got? Because we've got about 10 minutes at the outside. So if we go to the front here, to 4 or 5 rows from the front to Gaston. Thank you. Just wait for the microphone. There we are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm Gaston Donabapa, an African traditional chief. And I'm here for our traditions and much more for our rural areas. I see we have been speaking much more for universities, studies, education specifically. What about secondary, primary, nursery, and before nursery school, because the base is very, very important in families. What families must teach in Africa to their children when they born, before they go to nursery school, and after that, what must we do? Secondly, we also in rural areas in our villages. Everywhere in Africa today, we know that in all African countries, the rural area is average 70% of the entire population. And all what we eat in Africa, much more comes from the rural areas. But today, we also know that in rural areas, there are no university people which have got great diplomas from universities. But they are still working. But today, we also see that little by little, these villages becomes free because there is nobody. Everyone wants to go to town. And by the day they go to town, and the problems accumulate much more every day. So in our African rural villages, which kind of education we must provide to our children there? For agriculture, for breedings, and to get riches and what we have, we need in our basic life as men. And last thing is for our languages. You know, Africa is the mother of the humanity, everybody knows it. And we have much more languages in Africa than anywhere in the world. And each language, like each individual person, has something new to learn to Africa and to learn to the world. But today, we know that in our houses, even nobody, even parents, do not speak their language to their children. It's very, very bad. We are losing a lot of things. What about all these huge knowledges which are in our language and how to preserve it? That's the question. And at last, now we have our old patriarchs in villages, which are libraries and encyclopedias of knowledge. And they die with all this. That is what many writers and many people in Africa tell oral African tradition. How to save it much more now. Because the technology we have, that we have taken, we are taking from abroad, is what I can say, what these Occidental, Japanese, Asian, they come to us in order to save these traditions. And that's the way we must join the world so that we save our tradition, which will be very important for them too, because we also know that in Europe today, much more, they are returning to the need of what they have been doing before. And they come back to Africa for that. And I finish by saying the last model, the only good model we have in the world today is Asian one. When you have a Chinese, an Indian, a Japanese, even anywhere here in Africa, when you are in front of him, the first thing you see is his culture. It's his culture. But look at Asian are the first countries in the world today. China is the more powerful country in the world, even military, even economically, and even everything, anything. So that's the short contribution I wanted to ask us to help everybody save our oral traditions with the ongoing technology we have in the world. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Gaston. So we have time for a couple more. Yes, here in the second row.
Hello, I'm Farhana from Canada. I'm still stuck on the train. I'm sorry. You said make space in the train, but what if the train is going the wrong way or is going towards a wreck? Because, for example, UNESCO, I just learned this morning, shows that the most educated countries live in the most unsustainable manner. So that train is not going the right way.
Well, I'll take two more. One in the white shirt here, and then the gentleman in the blue shirt a few rows behind.
Thank you. I'm Ezekiel Kachisa from Malawi. I'm a technical advisor in GIZ Malawi. I think I'm against the motion. One reason is why invent a wheel? I mean, do we say that actually in Africa education has not worked because it's the model? Think carefully. You see that it's not the model itself, but how much resources do we have that support the education? Think of where it is working. I'm thinking of in my country where 1,000+ students sit for primary school leaving certificate. And how teachers teach is they teach for examinations. Not preparing for them for the life, no. But actually scramble for places in the secondary school because there are very few. Worse still, if they come to this Malawi school leaving certificate, scramble for places in the university, very few places. As a result, teachers, they don't teach for survival after school, but they teach for examinations. So it's not the model that is not working. Let's think twice. let's support the education in Africa with the right resources as we would want to wish, right? Our teachers actually faces with the, about 120 learners in one class, and we expect wonders out of that. No. Where it is working, it's maximum 25 learners in a class to support them effectively. So don't blame the model itself. But let's look at how are we supporting the system itself. We cannot run away from being in the global world. We have to be, because we cannot localize the curriculums. Saying that maybe because you come from along the lake, then you only learn about fishing. Then you will not be fitting in the global community. You will only be knowing how to fish, but you have to know how to live wherever you go. So thank you very much, Mr. Speakers.
Thank you very much. And our final question from there, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Julius Mutuku Kivuli from Kenya. I work with Kenya Literature Bureau. It's a publishing house and a content developer for schools and the country as a whole. Mine is short and brief. This is a great motion to open up our minds as Africans. My take on this is one, that Africa has great minds, innovative and analytical minds. What we need is one thing: support the African youth, the education systems in place, and let the youth come up with analytical and innovative ways to make better what we have. And short example is the West brought mobile phones to Africa. And in Africa, a good example is Kenya, Safaricom. We came up with the mobile money transfer. So that came from Africa. So whatever we have, the technologies, what can we do to make them better in an African way to solve our problems? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that, and thank you, all of you, for your contributions. And if I didn't manage to get you in, then my apologies, but we did this year manage to get quite a few in, so I'm very grateful to you for that. I'm now going to call on both sides to sum up, and then we'll take a vote. So first of all, I'm going to ask Njeri to sum up for the opposition. Njeri, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you for the comments and the questions and the engagement, and thanks also to my esteemed panelists and debaters. I have also learned a lot and recalled a lot as well. So my few comments are that, as we have been reiterating in this conference over and over again, we really do need a new narrative. And I noticed that the story of Lumumba was raised, and of course, we know this history has been difficult and that there have been blockages in the system. But another story that many people don't know as popularly perhaps is that of Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the Secretary General of the UN at that time and highly committed to supporting African countries to realize independence, and he too was killed in suspicious circumstances. So we have always had these partnerships. It's not just an evil story. I also reject the idea that the current model is fully colonial and that we don't have some ownership over it. I completely reject that. I believe that all of us here, we have been part of this education system. Our governments have built schools, we have built universities, we continue to work in them, we're in EdTech. It's important that we do not discredit our gains, even while we recognize what our challenges are. I would say that yes, we do agree on many points, but we disagree on the solutions, whereas our colleagues would have us follow a naive, in my view, vision of building an African education model from some mist in the sky, as if we are not already in an actual context. This would be unwise. I do believe that what we do need to do now is recognize what the universals are. Families are a universal institution, as our chief raised. Young childhood education and development follows certain cognitive stages that all human beings, regardless of your cultural context, are going to go through. Indigenous languages are under threat all over the world, not least in the communities in the Amazon. How could indigenous communities globally come together in ways that can support these languages continuing? Yes, the train is going in the wrong direction, but from an Ubuntu perspective, is it responsible to jump out? Or is it our turn to take the steering wheel, allow our youth to create new journeys, and therefore lead all of us together out of the crises? Ladies and gentlemen, we must oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Njeri. I now call on Professor Zahir Hamid to sum up for the proposition.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Is this working?
You need to press the...
That's better. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I recognize I've got 5 minutes. I'm going to use every bit of the 5 minutes, perhaps, but not that it's really required. In fact, I carried 2 pens when I came up here and lots of paper, and I was planning to make lots of notes to respond to, but unfortunately there was not a lot that I had to capture to respond. I did hear a lot of good stories though. But to be a bit more real, I think that, and this is really not about the motion only, and I think when we look at what we've heard, is that there's definitely a need to recognize that there needs to be a rapid advancement. Whatever the solution we find, there is something that needs to happen. And if that culminates in perhaps a different perspective in which we start thinking about the solution, then at the least we've done that. Because we perhaps collectively will agree that what the status quo we currently view is not the totally ideal scenario, right? I also am very pragmatic, and I know that academic debate often results in very little impact. And that's why our ability to actually be responsive in action is absolutely critical. The difficult part of being or participating in a conversation like this is when you plan to get into a conversation and you make notes, right? Now, unfortunately for my colleagues, they hung their hat on the point of isolation very early on. And perhaps there was not a lot more that came through. But when I had asked you to raise your hands and say, perhaps, I said the following, to get a sense, right? Indeed, Africa needs a renewed African education model, one that allows African education to compete better on a global scale. So in keeping with globalization, Africa is great enough, capable enough, and talented enough to promote an African brand of education by owning that brand, which competes at a global level. So it was nothing about isolation. In fact, I even promoted the idea of collaboration and partnerships. And finally, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, is yesterday I listened to a fantastic presentation by my colleague, and I'm not sure how many of you listened to the plenary session where there was a push towards a new African agenda, along that lines, right? And if we think about a revival or a new or an adjusted agenda, then that naturally means that we perhaps are looking for something better. That's it. And if you're looking for something better, that means that we take ownership of the responsibility of making it better. And all we are saying is that perhaps the solution lies with us and not necessarily looking elsewhere for it. And if that means taking responsibility and not seeking resources only for the turning around of the system, then perhaps we recognize that the motion of a new education perspective or model or approach or the lens we use for that is certainly one that we need to adopt. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Zahir, and thank you to all our speakers. We now come to the vote. So I'm going to take this by a show of hands. Would all those in favour of the motion that this House believes Africa urgently needs an African education model, please raise your hand. One hand. Right, that's all those in favour. And all those against? Well, I think the motion is carried on that. Normally, it's not as clear as that, I'm afraid to say, because, and I normally get the decision wrong and then get lots of criticism. But thank you all very much for that, and thank you to all our speakers. This has been a very entertaining debate and very, very interesting and informative. And thank you all for all your contributions. And we've been very fortunate to have two honourable ministers join us for this debate, so this really has been a very high-level debate, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. And thank you again. Sadly, that's the last event in eLearning Africa this time, but I very much hope to see you all again next year, and that we all continue to enjoy being a part of this wonderful eLearning Africa family. So enjoy the year ahead and see you next year. Thank you.